You're listening to Vantage Revival. Please enjoy this encore presentation of Season 1, Episode 11, Cannibal, originally uploaded October 1st of 2021. Today we watch a 2006 German direct-to-video movie about two men finding comfort in the dark world of online dating and the macabre act of eating flesh. Cannibal, now playing on Vantage Revival. So I want to start off with saying, if you haven't watched our episode of Grim Love, I highly recommend watching that before watching this one, because they kind of go hand in hand a little bit.
And by watching, he means listening, because this is a podcast.
Hey, you can watch the movie too. You can listen to our podcast. You can watch the movie. So this movie, Cannibal, is supposedly closer to the actual videotapes that only the police and the courts have seen, and less of that Hollywood production like we saw with Grim Love. How did you feel about that difference?
Yeah, so I felt like it looked like a high school project movie, but obviously that's the low budget movie that I was expecting. I felt it as though it probably did portray the clips more than the Hollywood movie did. And I liked that there was more realism in this movie. A few things that I noticed were him carrying him. Okay, here's where I'm gonna say him carrying him, and it's not gonna make any sense, but it's a silent film.
It's not really silent. There's talking in it.
There's talking that is very evidently dubbed over. It is very evidently added in. Like, they're talking English and the dubs are English, but you can tell that they were two different things. But we don't really get to know names in this movie, and I'm not sure if the names are real. I don't know anything about this kid. You really want to say something and I keep talking.
Let me say this. So obviously you missed the credits at the end.
Yes,
because
I did.
They gave the names.
Oh.
And the names were The Man
Okay.
and The Flesh.
Oh, okay.
So that is their titles in this movie, The Man and The Flesh.
And the flesh. Okay. When the man is carrying the flesh down the stairs, it definitely looks more real because he's kind of stumbling. He falls out of the bathroom and is obviously struggling to carry, whereas in the Hollywood movie, the man very easily picks up the flesh, brings him to this really nicely done kill room, and in this movie it's in like a barn, and there's definitely a lot of bodily fluids coming out of the flesh from his mouth, from his butt, and you get a good view of all this stuff. It is a very gory movie.
It's gritty. It's raw.
Yeah, it's raw, which I liked. I liked that a lot. And the gagging, the man was gagging, and I definitely feel that if you are dealing with a human body and cutting it open and ripping intestines and completely butchering a body, I feel like you're probably going to gag a few times, whether it's a fantasy or not. So I found that it was definitely more realistic than the Hollywood movie. One other thing I want to say before you chime in on anything is the one thing I found that kind of shows you the difference between what could be realism and what is a Hollywood movie is I found that they got very attractive people to play the roles of kind of everybody in the Hollywood film, whereas the flesh in this movie was actually making my skin crawl. His voice, his look, everything made me so uncomfortable because he was so creepy, and that was awesome and probably way more realistic. But Hollywood was this like very well put together man with another very well put together man. Like, everyone was very beautiful in the Hollywood rendition. So
I completely agree. I've noticed those differences in both the movies. I'm not surprised by that difference of having a beautiful cast in the Hollywood version and then having a grimier, regular looking kind of person in this German movie. I think that adds to the realism of it, and I agree that it was very raw. It was very in your face. It didn't shy away from stuff. When he's biting the penis, you see that penis in his mouth as he's biting it. That is not a prosthetic.
Yep.
And speaking of prosthetics, I felt that it was really well done. For being a really low quality movie, it has really bad audio. It has overexposed scenes. It just has problems with the overall technical side of this movie. But when it comes to the gore side of it, you can definitely tell they've used, I'm assuming, real animal parts when they're dissecting the flesh.
Yes.
When they cut off his penis, as gross and as disturbing as that is, it looked gross and disturbing. It didn't look like it was a piece of clay.
Yeah, it looked very well. And like you say, there is a lot of penis in this movie. So if you
overall nudity,
if you aren't wanting to see that, do not watch this movie. There's a lot of nudity
and gore
and gore in it, obviously. And I feel like that is something that really took to it, because you see the passion that they have. You see that this is something that they are working up to. It's something I enjoyed more than the Hollywood movie. I feel like if this movie and Tuesday's movie kind of mashed together, it would be a really good movie.
And I think on that point, that's kind of why we didn't like Carrie Russell's part, is if we just removed her and had more of the guys doing This Night, we would have, or you would have, enjoyed the Tuesday movie a little bit more than you did.
Exactly. And with that being said, I found that this one was a little stale at times, in the sense of it being, I'm going to keep calling it a silent movie, but let's keep in mind that there is minimal talking in it. For a silent movie, when nothing is happening and they're just kind of sitting in a room for 5 minutes or whatever, it does get stale. And it's like, okay, we don't need to see the actual, unless I'm watching the actual clips. This is a movie and it should be trimmed accordingly. And I do feel that they could have portrayed the same thing in a 30-45 minute movie instead of an hour and a half movie.
I agree with that, but I also think that because this recording of the original night is so infamous and so little people have seen it, maybe it's doing it justice that these people who are claiming to have seen it are showing kind of what you would be watching in an unedited fashion. So there is a pro to having it kind of be drawn out a little bit. And it's interesting because I've seen this movie twice now. And when I first watched it, I only saw it a couple years ago. I saw Grim Love when it came out in 2006, but I didn't see this one until literally a couple years ago because it's quite hard to find. Mm-hmm. And it's obviously a controversial movie, so it's hard to find, let alone just for that. So I had not seen them kind of back to back ever. Mm-hmm. And my opinion back then when I watched this Cannibal movie was, okay, it's just being gross, it's just being graphic, and that's kind of the only point of it. But now that we watched them kind of back to back, I was actually surprised how similar the movies actually were when it came down to those scenes. Because they were made around the same time, and I'm assuming neither one of them saw each other, but like the bathtub scene was very similar in both movies. The penis scenes are pretty similar in both movies. Mm-hmm. Obviously, this one's more graphic, but the idea behind it is very similar. The part where the flesh doesn't want to do this anymore is very similar to Grim Love as well. So I was actually quite surprised this viewing how close they were to each other, and I think I enjoyed Cannibal more watching it a second time than I did the first time, because I was just so disturbed and shocked by what I was seeing that it took away from the specialness of it preserving these videos that no one has seen.
Yeah. It makes you piece together what could actually be on those tapes when you see the similarities between the two movies. The penis sculpture scene where there's a sculpture that's being made and he takes the penis off and eats it. That is the same in both movies, and it does really make you think, okay, that has to be something that he recorded himself doing or has said that he did in order for it to end up in both movies. Yeah. And that happened multiple times throughout the movie where you think, okay, those two things aligned, so that's probably a very, very specific piece of the clip that people wanted people to know, or these people wanted people to know about. So I think that is really cool, seeing as it comes from both a Hollywood and a more close representation of what it is.
Completely. The one thing I did notice that was different was in this movie, the flesh is kind of more dominant.
Thank you. I wrote that on several different occasions for several different scenes of the movie. I found that the flesh was made to be more aggressive in this movie or demanding in this movie, where he's like, I need somebody to eat right now. Whereas,
or eat me right now.
Or sorry, I'm talking about the man. I think the man is more...
I disagree.
No, the flesh is definitely more aggressive. 100%. Like, super creepy, super aggressive. But the man, to me, seemed more demanding in this movie. Whereas in Tuesday's movie, he seemed sweeter. And
I agree with that.
He seemed less demanding of wanting somebody to come and do it. But on the flip side of that, I also found that in this movie, he was portrayed, and the words I put down were not exactly what I'm going for and not the emotion I think he's feeling, but I use the word remorseful in a way where I feel in Tuesday's movie, Grim Love, that it was like, I'm sorry I killed you, and it just kind of got into him slaughtering, and then, of course, one of the next scenes is him trying to find more people to eat. Whereas in this movie, there's definitely an attachment from these final days, or these first and final days that he spent with the flesh. And I feel like he was almost sad that that person was no longer there. Hence the feast, in my opinion, to him being a little bit more attached than what Grim Love made it out to be.
Mm-hmm. They made the man in this movie seem like he had more of a disability or a mental health problem. There's a couple scenes where he just moans and whines and howls for no apparent reason.
In the fetal position and...
Yeah, so I'm curious if that is something that actually happened, or if they were trying to make it seem that he had more of a serious mental health issue. And I kind of feel a certain way, and we will see this Sunday when we watch a documentary, if that will be more obvious of who this man was. Because I don't think either this movie or the one on Tuesday necessarily portrayed him exactly.
Well, and that's one thing that I felt like I missed from this movie as well, was a tiny bit of backstory. In the first movie, we got some backstory to... I don't know if it's real backstory, to be honest with you, but we got some backstory, whereas this, it was just right away. We're
living in a few days of his life.
Yeah, there's no backstory, there's no nothing. And I would love to, I think that's why I'm excited to watch the documentary, is because I'm excited to see who this guy actually was and what led him to what now I see, instead of, watching the more grim version of Grim Love. It's funny that they call it that, because this one's way more grim.
Well, actually, sorry, before you finish that, this one, it starts off with a grim fairy tale. I think that's more of what this grim means. It's not that it's grim in the sense that it's dark and foreboding. I think this is a love story that could be a grim modern day fairy tale.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I feel that I'd love to know what led him to this more. I want to know more in depth. Was it something mental? Was it something that we talked about on Tuesday, where it was maybe growing up with a hard life?
I also felt in this movie, with the flesh, with him being more dominant, that he also was way more sexual in this movie. Both of them are actually way more sexual in this movie than they were portrayed in Grim Love. And there's a few scenes where the sex is... I'm not going to use the word graphic. Nudity is not necessarily just graphic, but they show a lot of sex and different versions of it for them throughout that day.
Yes.
And there's a part where they're outside playing, I think, bocce ball naked.
Yeah.
And I was like, did that really happen? Like, it took me out of it for a second. And I don't know if that's a real thing.
It was like, and the way they montaged it was like they were like frolicking in a field,
Yeah, it felt a little out of place for me. But I wonder if that really did happen and they're just being true to the source that they are trying to recreate. But there was a lot of playful sex before they got to the dismemberment.
Well, and how the flesh called it was the next level or the next stage, or however he said it, where it's like, for us, it's like we go from holding hands to kissing to sex, whereas these people go from sex to biting off and eating themselves.
Yeah. And going back to your backstory comment, the only backstory that we really got was the man, and that he was constantly looking for someone to date, love. That was the idea, and that everyone just pushed him away. They never show any audio clips in those moments. We don't know what they're talking about. We don't know if he is asking to eat them or if it's just a regular date, but it appears that men usually push him away.
Yes. I noticed how at the point where they are cooking and eating the flesh's penis, that, and this is where I say that maybe he's, I don't know what word, I don't want to use the word remorseful, but even though the flesh had already spat out his portion of penis, I feel as though the man was still a little hesitant in the first place to take a bite. Maybe it's because it's his first bite of human flesh and he's just unsure about it, but to be so sure about it online, and to be so sure about it to get the flesh to come back to his house to try again to bite off his penis, for him to be hesitant in the moment when this time has actually come of his first cannibal experience, I feel like he was strangely hesitant to try it.
That could be it. I took it as he knew that he overcooked it and knew that he had ruined it. And that is a common theme in both movies.
Yes.
And I believe it is true to the source. And I think he just knew that he screwed up this experience for both of them and was almost saddened that he ruined their dinner. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why when he saw the flesh, kind of spitting it out and not really able to chew it, I think he knew before he taken that first bite, I screwed up.
Yeah.
I ruined this moment for us.
Yeah.
When he first fed him the portion of his penis, what came to my mind I was not expecting, but I remembered the time that you made pancakes for me.
I thought you were going to say the time that I tried congealed blood and just did not like it.
I mean, that would make more sense, but the pancakes came to my mind.
The pancakes were that bad.
The stale old pancakes.
I'm pretty sure there was bugs in that mix. I'm not kidding you. I saw some shit in my pancakes. Okay.
Don't take cooked food from Marissa.
No, that's why I don't cook. Which is so funny. I want to say this too. At the end of the movie, when he's cooking up all of the stuff, the only thing I could think about was like, oh my god, what a pain it would be to cook all. Like, I despise cooking, so to stand there and to like cook an entire body, fuck, no thank you. That is way too much work. Good for him, because I couldn't do it.
Lucy and the rendered fat.
I mean...
the pudding.
I mean... Maybe he just left her out in the sun long enough and she just kind of melted.
Just air dried her.
I'm curious as to why he was given a bath. I'm not indifferent about it. I'm just curious as to what was the point of the putting him in the bathtub.
So I'm not a doctor, so I don't have a medical opinion, but I'm pretty sure it was just to calm him down, because you do lose sensation when you're in water, and I think he was in shock, obviously at that point, for having his penis cut off. That just being in that warm water kind of takes away some of that pain and pressure, and he is highly drugged at that point as well. So I think it was more of a calming method than just letting him stay out in the cold, shivering and slowly dying. I think it was more just to calm him down, and that is the reason why.
Yeah, and now that you say that, I guess he did. In both movies, the victim mentions that he doesn't want to suffer. So I guess that is a good way to
just relax
him before they kill him.
I want to talk about a few of the technical flaws, or things that kind of stood out to me that I felt were odd choices by the filmmakers.
Okay.
One being the audio. So it's more in the first half of the movie, but the audio is really poorly done.
Yes.
There's a lot of background noise, a lot of white noise. I don't know if that was from it being a cheaper movie or if that was to make us feel uncomfortable, because it's an uncomfortable noise to hear for an extended period of time. And with that same token, there's a part where they are having sex before any dismemberment happens, and they play the worst music, which is fine, but then they include horse neighing during all of it, and I'm like, what? And I get that he has a farm in this movie, but I didn't see a horse. And they were also in the house when this happened. All you could hear was horses neighing the entire time. And I'm like, why did you pick this? Why did you pick these sounds? Do you get off on horse noises?
What I get off to is nobody's been. No, just kidding. I do not get off to horse noises or any animal noises, to clarify that. Just to clarify. I will be honest with you. My porn of choice is gay porn. So this movie's really confusing for me. Because they're having sex at one point, and I'm like, this is kind of hot. And then it gets weird, and I'm like, I don't know what to...
As we were watching, I was like, is this just a fetish video? Because a good chunk of it is a lot of sex.
Like, I'm going to be honest with you, and I'm going to be honest to anyone who listens. I'm sorry, Mom. But, like, I got a little wet during this movie. Not when it got weird and creepy and bloody and gory, but, like, the sex stuff.
The playful
stuff. I was kind of feeling it. Yeah, it was very weird.
So did we just watch a German porn?
This was literally just porn. Like, there's sex on TV, but then there's literally 2 penises out and then humping happening. That is just porn.
Or even the part where he asked him to bite his dick off. He was hard. He was erect.
Yes. And that's when it ruined it for me, was when he started cleaning the blood off of his penis, when the unsuccessful biting of his penis. And it kind of just like, it was a little soft then, and he was just kind of like playing around with it, and the camera was at a weird, creepy angle, and the guy was just creepy himself. So instantly soft, well, I was instantly dry as the Sahara, and did not get wet for the rest of the movie. So.
I mean, it gets crazy after that point.
Yeah,
so.
No, nothing after that was sexy.
Do you like pretzels?
Yeah, what the I hate pretzels, first of all.
You hate pretzels?
So that scene was even weirder.
Who hates pretzels?
Pretzels are fucking... Okay, no. Get me a Mr. Pretzel. And it has to be the cinnamon and sugar with extra cinnamon and sugar on it. I'll devour that.
Sugar on it.
Oh my god, what? Have you ever been to Mr. Pretzel?
I mean, yeah, but I get like the normal pretzels, which are the good ones.
What the fuck is wrong with you? When I worked at La Senza, there was a Mr. Pretzel. I ate a cinnamon and sugar pretzel every single day, and I'm pretty sure that's why I have so many cavities right now.
It's the pretzels.
But I don't like any other pretzel. Fuck off. What did you just say?
I said because of the pretzel.
Oh, I thought you said it isn't the pretzels. Like, oh, you want to talk about my sugar problem now, don't you?
Making up shit. But he poured milk into the pretzel. What? I mean, we're not Germans. Maybe that's a German thing. But have you ever seen anyone pour milk onto a pretzel or bread or anything?
No, and it was just a very weird scene. Just ripping open a pretzel.
I wasn't even sure what it was when it was ripped open for a second.
I thought it was just a bun of some sort. Like, I think, you know, when we would go to Hot Pot and we'd get those sweet buns?
Yeah.
I thought that's what it was just condensed milk and a bun.
Which are delicious.
But they're so, oh my god. Remember when we were out for dinner with work and they literally brought us a whole pitcher full of condensed milk because we got so many buns? Anyway, they just poured the milk over and then they squished this pretzel back together. I'm like, okay, it's a pretzel, I guess. And they started feeding into each other. Never once. And I'm, you know, that is a huge part of myself. I am part German. I feel like a lot of people are part German, but I know some weird food, especially from my mom's Dutch heritage. That might be the weirdest I've ever seen.
I mean, there's definitely weirder food out there, but it was just an odd thing that you don't usually see.
That's exactly
it's just odd.
Like it's I get people eating certain bugs or creatures or whatever, but it's just a milk and a pretzel. I just don't understand it, and who thought of that? That's what I want to know.
This guy, the man.
One of the things I want to talk about is the man's connection to the flesh. And at the end, you see him cooking up feet and different organs, and then it cuts to a scene of him having this candlelit, full 12-foot table, beautifully decorated with different fixings, not just human fixings, but peas and
beans and
all this stuff.
Yeah.
And then it kind of pans over, and you see at the other end of the table, his date is the decapitated head of
the
flesh. Do you have anything to say about that, first of all? Because I've got some stuff to say, but...
Again, I'm curious if that actually was a part of the footage that was seen, or if it was done just to kind of give the movie an ending. Because, like your issue with Grim Love, you didn't enjoy the ending, the actual ending of it. How does this movie that's very graphic, and that's kind of the point of this movie, what's a natural ending for it?
Yeah.
Is it the murder? Is it the processing of food? Or is it the dinner? And I think that if they want an ending, that's probably the most well put together bow on the movie is I did all the work, we did it, I processed him, I have cooked him, I'm now having dinner, the end. So I'm okay with it, but I've seen quite a few cannibal movies, and I feel that I've seen that ending more than a couple times of someone having a dinner feast at the end and there's a head or there's food. But again, was it based off the actual tape? Because if it was, I think that's fine. If it's their original idea, I don't think it's that original.
Yeah. I don't know if it bothered me per se, but was the fact that the flesh said that he didn't want anything of his to go to waste. And I feel like that was a way of wasting him, is keeping his whole head when he's buried everything else or cooked everything else.
So you thought the head was a waste? Because, I mean, you can't really eat much of the head
No, but
itself.
he did bury.
I think he buried, like, the intestines and things that he was not going to eat.
And he's not going to eat the head, so I'm just saying.
I think he processed it as much as he could and kept everything that he could eat.
Yeah. So that was just one thing for me. But it is, like, that's another way where I feel that, you mentioned this too, he was just looking for somebody that would love him. And I feel like this was a romance that was beneficial for the both of them, for what each of them wanted, where one of them ends up dead. So I feel like that was their way of tying off what I think is, like I say, an attachment or anything to the flesh is, sitting and cheersing a dinner of the flesh's own body with the flesh head at the other end of the table.
Kind of saying, we did it.
Yes.
Here we are.
Yes.
So with all of our movies, we give it a scoring system. 5 different categories with a max of 3 points each. First one being the edge of seat rating. Did it keep us entertained? I gave it a 2.5, and I think that's because watching it again the second time, I was more engaged because I had something to compare it to with Grim Love. So I'm not sure if that is a point for the movie or for the fact that we just watched both of them in the same week. And the only reason why it wasn't a full score is because there are those moments where it drags on, especially in the beginning, and then again kind of at the end with all the processing. After you see one thing butchered, do we need 8 more butcherings? Probably not, so a little excessive. So for me, it was a 2.5.
Yes, I gave this a 1.5 for very similar reasons to yours. Maybe I'm just not as good at sitting through those or staying engaged during those, but it was like the intestines being ripped out. Oh my God, it was like 5 minutes of him just like rubbing his hands on the intestines, and it was kind of pointless, right? So those things, I definitely start to lose interest in what's gonna happen next because I'm just sitting there, or the silent scenes of the man just cowering in the corner. My brain cannot wait that long when it comes to my movies. This is why I don't watch movies, because my brain can't focus enough. So therefore, I gave it a 1.5.
Next is the acting. I gave it a score of 2, which I'm not sure if that's too high or if it's too low. But the reason for that is what these men were expected to do in this movie, I don't think is easy for the average actor to be fully nude, to be ungroomed, to expose yourself that way, have sex with another man, bite another man's penis. Like, what they were expected to do deserves a high score. But when they're not in those scenes and they're doing their regular day-to-day life, because they're so average, it really isn't that exciting to watch them go on a date and go and drink a beer. It's just not that thrilling. Part of that is the acting. So they lose points there, but I think what they were expected to do gives it a 2.
Yeah, so I gave it a 2 as well. And I agree with you 100%. When it comes down to the crazy gory scenes, the stuff that not a lot of actors would probably be okay with doing, they would be a 3. But it's those date scenes. There's just a few gestures that the man makes where I'm like, There's the scenes where they're going back to the train station, and at the train station in general is just kind of not the greatest acting. So that, yeah, you do have to take that into consideration in the movie as a whole. So it did knock it down that 1 point.
Next is the climax. I gave it a 2 because I do think that with it being so graphic, especially at the end, that it is shocking. And you don't see that level of goriness in most movies. And if you do, it's very shortly lived. Why are you making that face?
You're not going to like my score.
Okay, well, we'll get to that. But again, in modern horror movies or even gory, older horror movies, there may be scenes that are equivalent of that, but they're very quick. You kind of blink and you might miss the gore. So this one, I feel, again, was in your face. And I think it ended as I would expect it to. So a 2.
I give it a 1. Maybe this series just isn't for me. But I just don't find myself being, same with The Edge of Seat, like I just don't find myself being 100% engaged. Yes, the gory stuff was really interesting to watch, and there is, I guess, a bit of a climax with the gore, but I, once again, you asked me this on Tuesday, and I don't know what I'm expecting from an ending, but I just feel like I didn't get an ending that I wanted.
You just confused me because you love true crimes, and this is true of crime. Yes. It's very little of it's fabricated, and yet a documentary where a man smothers someone, 3, that ending was amazing. But then this one where someone got literally butchered and eaten by choice, and you're like, oh, that ending, what is that? Like, I'm just so confused where your level of a true crime
is. So there is 2 types of people in the true crime world. There's true crime and there's serial killer documentary true crime. I like true crime. I don't care about this actor. I want to see the real person. I want to see the real video. I want to see all the real crime scene photos. I want to see all of that stuff. I want the gore to be real. Whereas there is the other side of serial killer lovers that prefer the reenactments and everything kind of being fake. Whereas I don't like the reenactment portion. I want everything to be real. I want to see every picture of the body ever taken. I want to see everything that's real.
But in this case, that's not an option. They're not publicly out there.
100%.
This is as close as you get to a real video on this case.
And maybe that's what is lacking for me, is knowing that I will never get to see, which I know you said that you think that this portrays a good enough video where I wouldn't want to see it. And I'm not saying that after seeing this I do want to see it, but it's the fact of knowing I can't just Google. Like, you can go into Google right now and Google Black Dahlia body, and there is millions of photos on Google uncensored of some girl's torso with all of her intestines ripped out, and she's just laying in a field dead, drained out. That's cool to me. Whereas I know that I will never be able to just Google this video and actually see what happened. And that might make me morbid and that might make me weird, but that is what I'm into. Wow, I sound so creepy in this podcast. To be fair, some of my dream jobs that I've had since I was very little is like a crime scene lawyer or a crime lawyer or like a homicide lawyer. I've wanted to be a true crime investigator. I want to be the first person on the scene of a murder. Like, that's where I want to be. So that stuff is very interesting to me. And I guess it's more out of interest rather than, you know, I'm not going to go masturbate to these videos. I want to
just... maybe this movie first off.
If we turn this off after about 30 minutes, I could probably get off to this movie. Yeah, so I think that's where it's different. Is for me, like, the Chris Watts documentary that we watched was real, and I got to see in the life of Shanann and her real life, and then you actually get to see the interrogation of the husband. And I'm not saying that I need gore for a true crime to be good. I just need real. I need real people, real cases, Judge Judy. You know?
Yeah, I just feel like you're putting this lens on these movies of this documentary, which isn't fair because you're kind of saying that it's not true to real life, so it doesn't deserve a good mark, is what you're kind of saying.
It's not. I'm not comparing it to the Chris Watts documentary.
No.
In general,
but you kind of said like you're wanting something that is real.
Yeah.
So this loses marks because it's not real, but it was never meant to be 100% real.
Yeah, no, 100%. But it doesn't even have to just be this case specifically. If there was another case that was completely reenacted, let's put it this way: if there was a TV show, it was called Red Rum, and it was actually really good, and I really enjoyed it, but it was a reenactment show. I would never watch that show again and only watch True Crime Daily in the sense, and I would give, even though I liked Red Rum, I would still give it the same scores that I'm giving here because it's all reenactment. There was nothing except for at the end of Red Rum, they posted a picture of who the real people were. The way they did the show was really good. It was obviously, I'm sure you can tell, it was following the murder, starting with the murder and going backwards. So it was very well put together show, but I still would rate it the same way as I'm rating this because like I say, there's a very, very strong divide between people who like reenactments and people who would go on the dark web to see anything. And I am the people that will go on the dark web to see anything type girl. So this just doesn't hit the mark for me. It's just not what I'm interested in. Just like you were not interested in my true crime documentary for its reasons. This series is just not doing it for me.
And you questioned me about that too. So it's back and forth.
Exactly.
100%. The one thing I do want to mention before we finish off our points that we didn't really talk about is the man who this is based off of, who is very much still alive. The man involved in this who went to jail for eating that man, he did not want this movie to come out. He was very vocal about it. He was very against it. And I'm sure anyone in this circumstance, if they were him, you wouldn't want this movie to be what represents you going forward. But I do wonder if it's because not only the subject matter, but is it because it's poorly representing who he actually is as a person. So I question your score because how realistic can they be and not get sued? They're not using his real name. They didn't use it in Grim Lab. They didn't use it in this movie. So technically this is not him. It's based off of him and it's based off of the video clips and whatnot, but it's not him. So it's not a full reenactment, so to speak.
So the documentary might get my points because even you saying that this man knew about this movie coming out and didn't want it, that excites me more than this entire movie did. The fact that he is or was alive and knew that this movie was coming out and knew that it was gonna depict this life of his, that interests me. It interests me because that was the guy who did this is saying something about it. And that interests me. So if the documentary, I don't know, you've seen it, maybe it goes this way, but if the documentary focuses more, if I get to see real pictures of this dude, I don't even care if there's no videos or anything. If I just get to see what this guy looks like or know his real name or have actual legitimate things that this man said or testified or anything, I'd be way more interested in it. But there is none of that. Like you say, it is all hearsay. We don't know if it's the real thing. And I once again, never get to Google and see how realistic this actually is to the real tapes, or maybe I can. I don't know. I obviously haven't Googled anything because I know we're watching these this week.
Yeah, it's always a surprise too when we watch those movies. We don't do any pre-planning.
We don't do any searching or anything. So I obviously don't know anything about this guy at all, and I feel like these two movies did nothing to actually show me who this guy really was. I still don't know his real name. I don't know his real face. I don't know anything about him, and I feel like that is what's stopping me from giving it a good score.
But you are engaged to continue the process and watch this documentary.
Not overly. I'm just hoping that the documentary is better. I'm hoping that the documentary offers what I want out of it.
Okay, we'll see. Next is the script. I gave it a 1. There's not much talking in it, and when there is, it is kind of very staged. It's very pre-recorded. There was one moment where the flesh, his lips were not moving, but he was talking.
I noticed that. Yeah.
So there's editing problems and there's script problems, but I mean, it still tells a story. There's a beginning, middle, and end. It may not be the best story. It may not be the most engaging story, but there is a story. So we don't give out zeros here. So he gets a 1.
Yeah. So I gave it a 1.5. I wanted to rate it higher than I rated the Tuesday one. I think I rated that 1 a 1. The only reason I wanted to do that is because I wasn't confused at the storyline in this movie. In Grim Love, like I said, there was random snippets of things. There's a girl that we didn't even care about being in the movie. I feel like this needed to just get a little bit higher because this did follow a linear pattern. There was no confusion other than at the beginning when we don't know what he's talking about, but we still understood what he was doing. I understood as soon as the guy walked up from the train platform that that's who he was going to kill, etc., etc. There was no real confusion as to what was happening, so I gave it a 1.5.
And lastly, would you watch it again? I gave it a 2, which is interesting because when I first watched the movie, I would have given it a 1. Because again, I feel like once you've seen it once, you've kind of seen everything.
Yeah.
And I was disturbed when I watched it the first time, so I didn't really have any urge to watch it again anytime soon. Mm-hmm. But after watching it this week and seeing both of them, I'm still happy with both these movies. I do think they have something to offer in the horror community in particular, especially this one, because it is such a grimier movie. It's so raw. And for that, I gave it a 2.
I also gave it a 2. So the reason I say that is because I feel like this would be a movie that I would show. I know this sounds so crazy, but like my mom might enjoy this movie.
Wow.
I get my true crime love from my mom. Definitely grew up. I didn't watch no Barney. I watched the Food Network, HGTV, and Investigation Discovery Channel.
I liked Barney. Just saying.
I feel like it would be something that I would be willing to like sit down and show other people who haven't seen it. My mom definitely would be interested in knowing that it is a true case. So it's something that I would recommend and watch with other people, but it's not something I'm going to sit down and watch myself anytime ever again.
Maybe.
No. Well, later tonight, I'm just going to
watch the first 45 minutes.
Crack up the first couple of minutes of that movie and just have a little me time.
So my scores all tallied together is 9.5.
And mine is an 8. That is 17.5. Does not take over on our leaderboard.
But I'm glad we watched it because it was different. You have to admit that it was different.
It was different. Am I glad we watched it? Gave me some good porn and some good gore. So
success.
Porn and gore. Porn and gore. Everything I look for in a movie.
Thanks for listening to Vantage Revival.